Hello, my dearest Darklings, and welcome to this bonus episode of Darkwytch Travels. If you're a regular viewer, you may recall that last week we took a tour around Greyfriars Kirkyard, and we had an interview with Jamie, who has worked there for 15 years. There was a lot of information I had to edit out for the sake of time last week, but I decided for this bonus episode that you can see the entire video. The only bits that are edited is where somebody has come to the door, and so there was a pause in the interview. Please enjoy the information that Jamie has to share about this kirkyard in Edinburgh.
Greyfriars. The Greyfriars Kirkyard itself, it goes right back to the 1400s.
Okay.
First established, this was the grounds of the Greyfriars Monastery. Greyfriars were Franciscan monks. They wore grey habits, so they were known as Greyfriars. Dominican monks were Blackfriars because they wore black habits. So this was all the grounds for the Greyfriars Monastery. They were self-sufficient. They had their herb gardens. They had orchards. So they were pretty much self-sufficient. They grew their own vegetables and things like that. So this was all their land. The monastery used to be situated down in the north yard by what is now the grass market area. It's kind of overlapped. Back then, though, it was a natural valley. This is long before the burials happened. So after many reformation after reformation, the monastery would be destroyed and ransacked, and then they'd rebuild, and then it'd be ransacked again. So they decided, coming into the sort of 1500s, that this wasn't for them. They were sick, so they abandoned the monastery, and it was left a ruinous state. The grounds were still here, but it was just land, really. It was served no real purpose. Now there was burials already happening from the 1400s for the monks who died, so they were buried here already. So it was already a kind of form of burial ground. So what happened was, we come into the 1500s, and sort of mid 1500s, the main burial ground for Edinburgh was St Giles in the High Street. What is now the car park was the burial ground for the centre of Edinburgh, well, Edinburgh City. We were a walled-in city, so it was all done within the walls, the confines of the walls. But obviously, space, more death due to disease, things like that. Especially in the sort of 1500s, it was rife right through till the 1600s. So there was a lot of death. We needed burials place that was bigger. Down the back of the natural gradient off the slope from the Royal Mile to the Cowgate, at St Giles, the bodies were coming out of the ground. The landslides were happening because of the weight. So we really needed to do something. That was when Mary Queen of Scots stepped in the 1560s, and 1563, she decided to grant the land of the Greyfriars Monastery to the people of Edinburgh as a new burial ground. So it became the Greyfriars Burial Ground. This is still before the church was founded. There's a lot of people who claim that Mary Queen of Scots gave the church to the people of Edinburgh. Mary had already been dead for a good old 70 odd years before the church was founded. Mary never gave the church, she gave the ground of the Greyfriars Monastery to the people of Edinburgh to be used as a burial ground. So yeah, then it became Greyfriars Burial Ground, and it remained to be the main burial ground for Edinburgh for almost 300 years. The only burial ground in Edinburgh for 300 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of the extent of the burials in these grounds. There's none of this 6 foot deep stuff. None of this 6 foot deep. It was a case of there's space, the body goes in, simple as. It was burials after burials after burials after burials after burials. It is a human lasagna, as I like to call it. That's exactly what it is. And then when you couldn't dig anymore because there was bodies, what they would do is they'd bring the body, then they'd bring earth from outside and put that on top. This is why we have now got the valley and the bump that we now have, because the bodies were put on and they were just built up. It's insane. Going by the interment records, ones that we do have, obviously the early ones, 1500s and things like that, they are non-existent. So we can only do a rough guess. From the sort of mid 1600s up to about 1700, we've got 1658 to 1700. We're looking at a volume of interments of a book that's about that thick, with just names after name after name after name after name. So you're looking about round about an estimation of about 750,000 bodies in this space. It is, yeah, it is full. It is very, very full. But obviously, it's known then the church was established in the 1600s for worship. It was the first. It was the first post-Reformation church of Scotland. That's why it's a very design. Although the church standing here is not the original church, this is the third attempt at Greyfriars Church. First one was blown up by Cromwell by accident. They were storing gunpowder. So, second one was hit by a storm and there was a fire and it gutted it. Absolutely gutted it. So throughout the sort of late 1800s, the church was actually a shell. There's old Greyfriars and there's new Greyfriars. The two churches are combined. But at that point, the old Greyfriars, it was just a shell, so they were still using a part of it until the most recent one that was opened on Christmas Day in the 1920s. So that's what we have now. But historic-wise, in the grounds of Greyfriars, it was the only burial ground for such a long time. So anybody who was anybody, is in here, and even the not anybody is in here as well. Yeah. Entire families, generations of families, and things like that. A lot of connections, well known for their time people as well. Walter Scott's father, places like James Craig, who designed Newtown, the Adam family, Robert Adam, William Adam, the architects. It can go on. Loads of Lord Provosts, mayors, doctors, surgeons. Some of the finest surgeons. The first proper surgeon in Edinburgh when it switched from the sort of all-round surgeon that could probably cut your hair and do your surgery and take a gallbladder out or something like that, but the first specialised surgeon, James Borthwick, he's here as well on the church, well, just in front of the church. That's his dancing skeleton that's on the side of the church that everybody likes to think is, or is told recently that it's a criminal whose skin was flayed, and this is a yes. The stories that some people can tell you is but it's a wonderful place and it's full of interesting people, a lot of interesting people, and a lot of people connected to Greyfriars too. Known mainly, I would still say, throughout time it is more well known, I'd say, for obviously the little dog, the story of Greyfriars Bobby. But obviously known for recently, unfortunately, for another thing where allegedly a certain author, took inspiration from names of gravestones. Whether that's true or not, I believe she has stated herself that, she never took inspiration, but, it doesn't stop 1.3 million people a year coming through the gates to have a glimpse of a name on a gravestone, unfortunately. But of course, there's the dark side of it. It's now also known as one of the world's most haunted locations due to interactions with people over the years since 1999 in a locked off area off the graveyard called the Covenanters Prison. There is some belief that the graveyard itself, outside, anywhere in the graveyard, you're susceptible to an attack of some description, or which is very untrue. The epicenter of this study, and indeed what is now known as the Mackenzie poltergeist, is the epicenter is the Covenanters Prison and one mausoleum within the Covenanters Prison. It's very confusing. A lot of people do get confused because the Mackenzie Mausoleum, which indeed the Mackenzie poltergeist is named after, the mausoleum, not any particular Mackenzie. It's called after the mausoleum. That is in the main graveyard, the big domed structure. There's not just one Mackenzie in there. There's several. There's 11 Mackenzies in that mausoleum, and another 23 other people as well who are not Mackenzies. But that again shows you how space was needed. So it's well known for some people would have you believe that the ex King's Advocate, Lord Justice Sir George Mackenzie of Rose Hall is somehow running about after death, scratching people up when they visit the locked section of Greyfriars Kirkyard, which couldn't be further from the truth. There's unfortunately too many people nowadays who like to read something on a website and take it as fact without actually doing their own research You know, it's something I've always insisted on doing. Um, Looking into something properly, you cannot be an expert on something for reading a couple of websites or read a book. Um, George Mackenzie, I think, in history in Scotland is one of the most misunderstood people, I think, thanks to social media and today's elements. Now, Sir George Mackenzie was Lord Advocate of Scotland. He wrote the laws of Scotland. He was one under the King. He'd worked his entire life to get to where he was. You know, he studied law. He was born in Dundee. He studied law in St Andrews. He studied law in Glasgow, and then he studied law abroad in Italy. He was the top of his game. He was Lord Advocate. So he'd done his time as defence lawyer and prosecution lawyers. He'd done his time in the bar. Now, what people tend to think of George Mackenzie is how he hated the Covenanters, he was persecuting, you know, Bloody Mackenzie his nickname was, which wasn't actually brought around until the Romanticism novels of Walter Scott and that period where everybody needed a baddie in the fantasy novels, and of course George Mackenzie, being the height of authority, was the one that got it. Anybody who studied George Mackenzie, certainly as much as I have, will be able to tell you straight away that George Mackenzie never killed a single person with his own hands, yet he is, you know, labelled with murdering thousands of Covenanters. Not a single one. Even in today's world, in a chamber of law. Now, back in the days of the 1600s, there was obviously the Covenanting movement that was going on. The Covenanters were nothing to do with freedom or, you know, Scottish independence. They were basically, we didn't want the Anglicisation of the Scottish Church, like England. You know, we did not recognise the King as the head of the Church. We recognised God as the head of the Church. That was it. Presbyterian, Scottish Presbyterian, simple. We were like, God save the King, but don't mess with our religion. We don't want your bishops. We don't want your prayer books. You know, stop changing the words in the prayer books to make it our kingly saviour, our kingly God. You know, there's us, there's the King, then there's God. God save the King. We will not take up arms, but you do not change our religion. We are not interested. End of. But of course, when you've got the Stuart Kings who were as paranoid as they were, they wanted to make change, and of course it was all come to a head between obviously James and then Charles II. So, basically at that time, you were with the King or you were against the King. Okay? There was no middle ground. You know, there was none of this, well, maybe they're right, we'll just let them get on with it. We're, you know, open to all religions. No, you were with the King or against the King. If the King thought that he was bigger than God, if you didn't agree with him, you're against him, it's high treason. No matter what level you're on, it's high treason. The punishment for high treason, as it was for centuries, was hung, drawn, quartered. That was it. William Wallace. Hung, drawn, quartered. Even England-Scotland rule was exactly the same. High treason. So, if you were against the King, it was high treason. So he then made it, well, if you don't agree with me that I'm the head of the church, then it's high treason, I want you all killed. Now, some people would have you believe that Sir George Mackenzie was going out on the street and rounding up these Covenanters in the street and then, you know, taking them and then just murdering them, cutting their heads off and spiking their heads on gates and then torturing them and all that jazz. No. George Mackenzie was against the use of torture, for a start. That, he's actually stood up in court, he defended Covenanters in court, and stating this, that this self-statement was taken under the duress of torture. How can somebody make a decision when your body is in that much pain? Your body's almost shutting down. How can you be consciously making a decision like that? And he did. And that was the first time that he could have lost his life for that, because, you know, he was shown almost support. But he took a chance, and he was well respected enough to do it, and he did. The second time that he almost could have lost his life is when he started the act for the abolition of witch trials. It was that George Mackenzie, same one who murdered all these people, the misogynist, who abolished witch trials in Scotland. Because again, under torture, and he just couldn't believe that a female subject in front of him could change into an animal or could have the influence to change a weather system. He just found that unbelievable, and he actually stood up in court. He said, if you believe that, sir, then maybe it's you that has the problem. You know, and that was because it was George Mackenzie. People actually went, well, actually, maybe he's right. Maybe he's got a thing here. You know, but again, people would have you believe he's this horrible, murderous, torturous, you know. When he was Lord Advocate, sitting judge, of course he sent people to their death because it was his job. You know, a judge's feelings does not come into it. A judge is there to pass sentence. These Covenanters were already found guilty of high treason in a court. It's the judge's job to pass sentence, as it is today. It's exactly the same. So yes, he did send people to their deaths because it was what the law said, and he had to follow the law. If he'd shown any sort of leniency towards them, his personal feelings didn't come into it, he would be on the stocks and he would be hung, drawn and quartered because he'd be shown leniency and he'd then be against the king. He'd also then be in high treason. He wasn't about to throw that all away for his own personal feelings because he knew how dangerous it was. But he persevered, and of course Presbyterian became a thing. So he was thinking off. But of course people then would say, well, you know, he hated the Covenanters that much. You know, it was him that imprisoned them. He came and tortured them in the prison. I'd like to state right now, George Mackenzie, at the time that the prisoners were brought from Bothwell Brig in 1679, the last battle between Covenanters and government troops, we don't know why they weren't executed. They were beaten, the Covenanters were beaten at the battle. They weren't executed on sight for some reason. They decided that they were going to bring them to Edinburgh for a summary court case. Whether it was a show of, this is really what happens now, stop. You know, we don't know. Either way, 1,200 men were rounded up and they were marched to Edinburgh. Now, there was nowhere big enough in Edinburgh to put 1,200 men. The Covenanter, the Carlton jail, not a chance. There was nowhere big enough, you know, so they're like, well, what do we do? So there is documentation on this. The troops had to hold the men outside Edinburgh for 3 nights, purely because the paperwork that they needed to be signed to use an area of Greyfriars Kirkyard, which is now the South Yard, the church had bought the land to the south. They'd bought the land basically to use as a burial ground, an extension of the graveyard. This was 1675. That land was purchased. The walls had been put up basically to bring it in. The Flodden wall was already existent, so that was the boundary wall, and they bought the land, so they basically were going to open up the south and start building, burying people in that area. However, the battle in 1679 stopped that. Somebody had the idea, well, why don't we keep them in that holding area? It's not been used for burials yet, but the church do own it. There's only one person in this country who could sign the paperwork to overrule the church on a matter of land, because it wasn't a matter of God, it was just a land matter, was George Mackenzie, Lord Advocate. He could overthrow the church on that and say, right, well, I'm basically acquiring that land for a short lease. You have it back when I'm finished, but I'm taking that land off you. The government, the Crown, is taking that land for 4 months. Problem was, George Mackenzie was in London at the time. This is why the men were held for 3 nights before they could enter Edinburgh, because the paperwork wasn't signed. And we know that because the person had to come back from London with the paperwork. That's why they were held up. So that proves that George Mackenzie wasn't even in Edinburgh when these men were here. George Mackenzie never once visited the Covenanters prison. He had nothing to do with it whatsoever. He only signed the paperwork for it to be allowed to be used as a makeshift prison for 4 months. And that was it. But yeah, there's some people who tell you that he was down here, he was murdering women and children, who of course came from the battlefield. You know, the amount of stories, it's so misrepresented, it's unbelievable. But everybody needs a baddie, but that's no excuse to be making up, you know, how he was, allegedly he was also responsible for bricking people up at Mary King's Close. I've heard that one. He was accused of the children being bricked up in the nursery on the Royal Mile, which again never happened, certainly not by him, and it never happened anyway. You know, it's all these things over time that unfortunately people have, like urban legends, but unfortunately because of social media these things can grow arm and legs, and you know, do I believe that Sir George Mackenzie of Rose Hall, Lord Advocate of Scotland, is running about a graveyard after death, scratching people and attacking? No, of course I don't. You know, he didn't interact with, you know, people like us in his life. Why would he interact with people now? You know, he is buried in here purely because this is another thing as well, that he hates the Covenanters and he was against the Presbyterian way of life, and you know, he wanted to be buried in a Presbyterian graveyard. He asked to be buried here, not because to wind up the souls of the Covenanters in the prison. It's nothing to do with that. That's another myth. It's because at that time the church wasn't the size it is now, and before the new part was built, at that time you could see right over Edinburgh, you could see right over down the Royal Mile, you could see St Giles Spire and things. So the view, that is why George Mackenzie wanted to be buried there, because of the view, and he was Lord Advocate. If he wanted to be buried there, then he was. His mausoleum was built 40 odd years before he died. So he knew exactly where he was going. It was nothing to do with the Covenanters and winding the spirits up and that. Like I said, he'd already defended. After the whole Presbyterian came in and it was abolished, that it wasn't high treason to. He did. There was a lot of Covenanters still being held in conditions, and he defended them and got them out with them, and basically saved their life. But people forget about all that, or they just don't do their own research. They just rather read, a website and see how this torturous, the
What do you think of the other theory about the Black Mausoleum, of it being the family who didn't want to be interred into the mausoleum?
I've not heard of that theory, actually. I mean, again, though, this is where, again, people get confused because of online. The Black Mausoleum and the Mackenzie Mausoleum are two different mausoleums. Now, this comes about because of tour companies, who do their own thing. That's absolutely fine. But they do not have access to the Black Mausoleum in the Covenanters prison. There's only City of the Dead that have the access to that, the ones that brought you the Mackenzie Poltergeist. So they will take their groups around the graveyard and they will stop outside the Mackenzie Mausoleum and they will tell you, this is the Black Mausoleum. Yes, it's dark coloured because of obviously the stone over time, it's black. It is the Mackenzie Mausoleum, that's correct, but it's not the Black Mausoleum. That's just his burial chamber. The main factor of that is how people have been attacked inside it. I don't understand. One, it's only 8 foot by 8 foot inside. How you've got 30 odd people, 40, 50 people in that space. I'm not surprised people were coming out with scratches, because they'd be crawling over themselves to get out, because you'd be crammed. Second, the public have never had access to that mausoleum at all. It has never been open to the public. There has never certainly been open to tour companies. So how people have been attacked inside it and recorded it, that, good luck.
Well, I'm only going off what Ben was saying last night, that there was a man who bought and built the Black Mausoleum, and his family said to him, "No, this is where you're going to be."
No, that I know where Ben's coming from that.
Right,
No,
okay.
That goes back to when it was built in 1691. Sorry, 1680 something. No, at the time before the Mackenzie had his mausoleum built, there was another mausoleum there, but they moved it.
Right.
That was the Foresters, funnily enough, the Foresters of Corstorphine, which is my surname, Corstorphine. They were there, but that mausoleum, because the family had run out, basically there was no more burials to be had. What they did is they basically picked up, it was an enclosure, so it was just walls. So what they did is they took the bricks, they dismantled it, and they built it too long. Now we know that because the Forester name from the front of the old one, where it used to stand, is in the back wall at the bottom. I don't know why they've put it in the back wall at the bottom, because they could have just put it back, because it was brick for brick. So that was moved too long. However, they didn't move the bodies. The bodies remained, which is where it comes into the story, which I'll explain in a second. So that was what they did. Now when they moved the mausoleum, obviously you've got the burial. So what they did is they just put a thin floor down, and then it was flat, and then they put the burial chamber for Mackenzie, and then they built the main bit up here. So you've got basically the bit where you look in the doors of the Mackenzie Mausoleum, that's the ground. You've got a bit that goes down to the burial chamber. Under that, the Foresters are one under that, with a thin slate floor. So what happened was, in 1998, a homeless guy was looking for somewhere to spend the night. It was horrendous wind, rain, and he got into the Mackenzie Mausoleum via the back. There is a space at the back of the mausoleum. It's a square. It was open at that point. It's now obviously meshed over. For a thin person, you could get through it no problem at all. That's exactly what he did. And the wind was rattling through the mausoleum, so he opened the gate to go down to the Mackenzie burial chamber, because it was like shelter. I mean, the guy, I don't think, was causing any malice. He just wanted shelter, and it was cover. What he didn't know, though, as soon as he stood on that slate floor, that was when he went through the floor, and that is when he hit the body dump. Now, unfortunately, I do have to say one thing about Jan's original documentation of it from when he brought it to the public. At that time, Jan had said it was a plague dump that the guy had fallen into. We now know that there was no plague victims buried in Greyfriars. You know, there was too many of them. This place would be higher than the castle if that was the case. They were buried outside the city. They were diseased. They didn't put them in parish graveyards. One, it takes up far too much space, and two, they're diseased. So they would be put in mass burials. But the guy did fall into what remains of the Seven Forrester family. Again, going back by the Book of Interments, you can see that. You can tell because it says the Forresters and it says how many is there. So that was what he fell into. So he did fall into a body dump, but it wasn't plague victims. I think that was just a little bit of embellishment on the story part to make it more thingy. But that did happen, and that's what we think is the pivotal moment, because when he went down, he grabbed what he could and he grabbed a coffin. And of course the coffin came down. It didn't break open, but it cracked and the coffin was disturbed. So we think at that point, because literally I think it was about 4 days later, that is when the first recorded instances were coming through from within the Covenanters prison area. Not outside the Mackenzie Mausoleum, it was in the prison area. That was when the prison was open to the public. You could walk around it, and that was the case. People were walking around as they do. But in that one area, in the prison area, that's where the reports were coming out of. People were getting knocked out cold. There was 11 ambulances called in the space of 3 months for people who were found unconscious. We're not talking about like the local jakies, we're talking about just normal people. They were just found lying on the ground. So of course the media then picked up on this. This was the end of 1998. The local media, Edinburgh Evening News, picked up on it. And they started, talking to people who had, complained that there were things, and they were like, the strange happenings in Greyfriars Kirkyard. So that was fine. It was getting a bit of media attention. Then they took the decision to organise for an exorcism to be done. Nothing to do with us. We weren't established at that point. Jan, my boss, the owner of City of the Dead, he thought this would be a great book because he was looking in the newspaper articles going, this is unbelievable. The sheer amount of people that are saying that they've been scratched or attacked or, So he's like, this would make a great book. So he was already starting to document it all and started, this is really interesting. It didn't have a name at this point. It was just the strange happenings and, these sinister, sinister spectres and things like that. So they organised the exorcism to be done by a local medium called Colin Grant. He was a very well respected medium, a clairvoyant from Edinburgh, very well known in the city. So they organised for him, obviously with cameras and everything else, one evening to come out and do an exorcism in Greyfriars. Of course, cameras are rolling. So about an hour into it, he collapses. And he says, I can't do this, it's too strong, it'll kill me. So of course the media was like, so that was it. Exorcist is laid down, the exorcist can't deal with Greyfriars, the entity of Greyfriars is too strong, and, oh God. So of course the media is getting a bit more, Jan's like, this is great. So he started talking to people going around and things like that. Now, literally 6 days after that, unfortunately, Colin Grant is doing a private reading in his home for Sunday. I believe it was a tarot card reading. He was doing a reading for them, and present was the woman he was doing the reading for, and of course his wife. His son was extremely young at that point, and he is doing the reading, and suddenly he stops. And he just stops and he looks at the woman and he says, Greyfriars, there's no good news, there's just bad. Bang, his heart stopped, he dropped dead. Witnessed by his wife and this woman. So of course, you can imagine, the media just went, exorcist killed by Greyfriars. So of course the media storm was unbelievable. People were coming from all over the world, there was news crews, there was everything. Now, this is where the council step in and they go, right, this is our land. This is a burial ground. We're not having this. Unfortunately, it was attracting the wrong kind of people as well. The ghost hunting groups there were climbing over walls, they were climbing on stones, they were setting up cameras, they were leaving their wires lying everywhere. People were tripping over all their gear. They were getting angry because people were knocking their gear. It's a public area, although it's owned by the council. It is still open to the public. So yeah, the council went, you know what? This is it. We're shutting the gates. So they did. They locked the gates, and the problem solved. Can't go in. So that'll stop it. So that was their way of just saying, enough's enough. So Jan, of course, was still writing the book. He was like, so he used to live in a flat just there. So he came down one day, gates were locked, and he was like, "What's going on?" So he eventually got hold of the council departments, and he was like, "Look, I'm writing a book. I need to speak to people who have been in there, and get their, feelings if they felt anything. Maybe they've not, but I need to speak to people for research. I want to carry this on. I've done all this, and I'd like to carry on." And they went, "No. What do I do? Does he just throw all this research away for the past sort of almost year, or what does he do?" He's like, "Right." So he had to think about it. And what he decided was, well, what's the best way to get people from all over the world, different beliefs, different backgrounds, different outlooks. Right, okay. So what he did was he went back to the council, he organised a meeting. There was a deal struck between them. Basically, he went in with public liability insurance. And he said, "This is my name. My name. I want to take people into that area. I want access to it. I want to rent that area from you. As a tenant, you could be the landlord. We'll also take on the office, the old gatehouse that's hardly got a roof on it. We'll use that as an office. So we will be basically giving you rent for 2 properties that you won't be getting anything for." And like I said, public liability insurance, it's on my head, so that covers. Council got nothing to do with it. We're just your tenants. And of course, they said yes. So that was it. 1999, Jan then got sole access to the Covenanters prison to continue the documentation of what is now the most documented paranormal case in the world, I believe. Over 3,000 eyewitness accounts in over 25 years. And we still are the only company with access to the prison area, which obviously we obviously do. We've got a great working relationship with the council who own the grounds. Still do after all this time, But the downside of that is, we are. I've been with the company now 15 years, and every day I get. This is my full-time job. So when I'm discussing the poltergeist case and that with people, and without me coming across as a complete idiot straight from the start, I do generally tell people from the start, look, if you're going to get in a conversation about the Mackenzie poltergeist, I want to tell you right now that this is my full-time job. I get paid to deal with this daily. I am the world's leading expert in the Mackenzie poltergeist because I deal with it daily. This is my entire job is based on the Mackenzie poltergeist. This is why we're here. We document it. So before you want to tell me to go research, I want to just put that in there straight away. Don't argue with me because I've got all the documentation, I've got everything, and I've been doing it for the last 15 years. So it is difficult because I do get jailed on Facebook quite a lot because of people telling me to go research about the Mackenzie poltergeist. So go research. That's my flag. That's my red flag to the bull. That as soon as the words come out of somebody's mouth. So. So it is my daily life, talking about the Mackenzie and obviously being here as well, so out of the years, it is something that interests me as well because he's such, especially about George Mackenzie. But when Jan named it the Mackenzie poltergeist, he called it that after the mausoleum because he thinks that was the trigger for whatever started happening in the prison area. Was when that homeless guy broke into the Mackenzie mausoleum, and he thinks, never once has Jan said it's got anything to do with any particular Mackenzie. If anything, if it has to be, somebody who's, angry from the past, surely it would be somebody who was kept there, for 4 months in extreme conditions. Which again, it wasn't George Mackenzie's fault. This is what they decided to do with the men, was to hold them in that area with no shelter for 4 months. The only torture that was going on, and people weren't tortured, they weren't like strung up and racked and whipped and all that stuff. No, it was mental torture. They were held, 1,200 men were held in that area with no shelter, and it was the elements, it was the weather. It was freezing cold. Over 800 lost their lives behind those gates. They were already willing to die on a battlefield, so for the cause. And we'll never understand. Most of us won't understand. What it's like. They were willing to die for their religion. That was simple as. That's how strong. So that's all they had. That's all they had was their religion, and they could walk out of the prison at any time. if they just recognised the king as the head of the church.
Right.
That was it. It was easy. That's all they needed to do. You know, there was, that was it. They could just then leave. And no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't at all. I mean, I can't say not everybody did. I mean, a couple of them will have done. But, you know, they weren't just about to go lie and go, yeah, of course, yeah. See the king, yeah, of course, yeah. Maybe yes. Straight on their Facebook. I just pulled a blinder. No. It was serious. No messing around, they would not lie in that. But the mental torture came as well when they were made to lie face down in the dirt, in the mud. If they looked like they were conversing or possible, try to plan an escape or something, because they had the guards had the scaffold built up, the wood scaffold up to the height of the wall so they could look over. So they could see straight in. So if they looked like they were conversing or moving, or the person on the right would be shot with a musket. Possibly not to kill, but shot in the leg, shot in the arm, enough to cause pain and, possibly infection, and of course with the conditions, that would, could lead to death as well. So that would be a horrible thing for a Christian and Presbyterian to have somebody killed because of something they'd done. It would almost be, they would feel almost as guilty as, So yeah, it was mental torture. It was mental. It wasn't physical. Well, be shot in the leg and stuff. I kind of say it's not physical torture because it is. I mean, the body would be getting, but it wasn't the torture as people like to imagine. Not the on the rack or the waterboarding or putting the slab with stones and weight. Not that kind of torture. It was purely mental. To break them. That was it. So they recognised the king as the head of the church, and to make them aware that that if they went against the king again, then it'd be a lot worse. It could be a lot worse. 275 were then taken out, and they were put on a ship to go to the New World, Americas, sold as slaves. Unfortunately, the ship hit a storm on the coast of Orkney, and the ship was pushed onto the rocks, and allegedly it sunk. There is contemporary reports that a couple of the Covenanters did escape, and they ended up on Orkney, and they set up life. And again, we can't prove or disprove that. But according to the official reports, that the ship was all lives lost. I believe in the 1970s there was dives went down and they found the Crown. There was the ship, the Crown. They found the wreckage, and there is evidence of cannon fire. The Crown wasn't armed; it was a cargo ship. However, the escort ships for the king, they were armed. Obviously, the escort ships that were going to take them to America. And yeah, we think what's happened is they just turned them. But it looked like Charles was doing his thing. He wasn't killing them, but he wasn't letting them get away with it in this country. They could go and be sold as a slave. But no, I don't think he had any intention of ever letting them get anywhere with the British waters at all. So yeah, it's sad. I mean, not it wasn't a nice place, but and then after that though, the land was then the church decided they didn't need quite all that land. It was lying empty till 1704. So from 1679 right through 1680s, 90s, it was 1690s after George had passed away. That was when they sold the remainder of land off because they didn't need it. There was other parishes opening up in Edinburgh. We weren't quite needing quite as much of the city walls anymore. So there was sporadic building going on and extending. The Flodden Wall obviously was part of Greyfriars. That's one of the defence walls. So it was incorporated, and that's when they kept the South Yard, the straight line, and that was then 1704 was the first burial in the South Yard, right at the very, very bottom, and it was built up. The mausoleums were then put in. Again, though, some guides will stand at the gates, and I've heard them myself telling you that's the cells that they were kept in and everything. But of course, that then person on their tour goes back, and that's the truth. So of course, then they tell somebody else, "Oh yeah, the cells are still there in the prison." People come and go, "Oh, I heard that these are the cells." No, they're not. Well, that's not what I heard. Okay. So yeah, that again leads to things. Yeah, it's certainly a daily battle, but it's part of joy of being a tour guide, I suppose, is telling people as far as you can. as far as your own research has taken you. You know what you believe to be the truth. But I think the lack in research is the boundary. You know, like I said, people are just quite happy to read maybe 1, 2, 3 web pages, articles, and if that 2 articles have been taken from the original one, of course it's going to be the same. So you're going to have 3 versions of the same thing, and that's the problem. And that's then researched because they've read 3 different things, and all 3 things say the same. Of course they do, because they came from the original one, which is wrong. So that wrong here has now become 2 wrongs, and that's now 3 wrongs because you're reading the wrong one, and it's just ongoing. Yeah, can it be changed? Probably not. It's too far. You know, it's gone. People believe what they want at the end of the day, and all we can do is just tell them to the best of our ability. You know what we've done, but I don't think there's any need to embellish anything about, you know, Greyfriars or add anything to it. And certainly about, you know, Sir George Mackenzie. You know, he was such an important figure, such a formidable figure. You know, people were terrified of him because he was Lord Advocate. You know, I said he wrote the laws of Scotland. You know, so he was, yeah. But of course, he did have his strong side as well, where he did defend people that were being wronged. And he would stand up in court and defend them, you know, because it's his job, and that's what he did. It pretty much covers George Mackenzie.
Lindsay, yep.
We just do the dog then, eh?
Yeah.
So, great. So, Greyfriars Bobby, the wee dog that sat on his master's grave for 14 years. So, obviously everybody's heard well, not everybody I would imagine, but most people know the story. They know the story. Now, what we have to remember is going back to 1911 when Eleanor Atkinson actually wrote the story for the first time. She was the first person to put it to print. She brought it to the public. She wrote it as a book to sell. It wasn't an informational booklet. It wasn't a newspaper article. It wasn't it was a book. It was a novel to sell. So, Eleanor Atkinson was an American lady who never left her home state of America. She never travelled to Scotland, she never travelled outside America. But she wrote Greyfriars Bobby. So, how did she know about this story? She obviously heard it from Scots going across to America. You know, it's no wild thing, especially in Indiana area and stuff like that. You know, the mountains, and then you've got the Appalachian Mountains and things like that. It was all set up by Scots. You know, so Scotsmen were across there. They would be bringing our traditions and customs and, you know, banter and alcohol, whiskey probably. Now, she wouldn't be able to speak to these Scotsmen when they were working. Obviously, they were working. You know, you can't just have a woman coming and just chilling out with you and just sitting down while you're, you know, doing whatever they were doing. So the only time she would be able to speak to them would be in a bar, probably after, you know, some spit saloon or something like that, you know, that's been set up in a rickety shack. So this is how she would get the story. So of course, anybody that's ever been to Scotland and talked to a Scotsman in a pub, you'll know that we love to embellish in the stories, you know, especially after a few whiskies. Oh yeah, I mean, Billy Connolly is a fine example, you know. That's exactly, so you can imagine somebody sitting down like a Billy Connolly type person speaking to this American lady who's, 1, trying to understand what the man's saying, and 2, trying to get some sense out of him. Oh, me dog's lying on the ground, me master died 40 years, oh, poor me dog. So, you know, so I can't believe it was word for word for a start. Straight away, there's no way that she could write down and dictate exactly how she heard this story from a random Scotsman or 2 random Scotsmen. So, that aside, she wrote Greyfriars Bobby about this poor little Doug who is a dog to a shepherd called John Grey. They come to Edinburgh from the Highlands. My second issue with that is, why would he come to the centre of Edinburgh? There's no agricultural fields or anything in this area for at least 6 miles, which is Collington. That's the nearest place at that time that would have agricultural fields. The centre of Edinburgh was just brick. You know, there's no jobs for shepherds in the centre of Edinburgh. None. So why he came to the centre of Edinburgh looking for work, that has to be questioned as well, because it would never have happened.
According to the Disney movie,
Yes.
and as we know, we can say that with a pinch of salt, He came to Edinburgh because he'd basically been forced to retire due to his age.
Yeah, that I think that was taken. I think that was a nice way of saying as well from the Highland clearances and stuff. I think they were putting a bit of that into how he was forced to leave. You know, because one, he wasn't as fit as a young person now, i.e., he wasn't as fit as the machinery that would come in and be able to do the job. So I think there was a bit of that with the Disney thing as well, trying to get the. I mean, obviously Disney are not known for their factual documentaries.
Jumping Lemons jumps to mind for some reason.
Yeah. So either way, though, yeah, he came to the centre of Edinburgh. The story was he was here. He was here for 2 years, and then he passed away with tuberculosis. Of course, then the dog was heartbroken. So the dog then, after he was allegedly buried in Greyfriars, the dog stayed on his grave for 14 years. So scientifically, your body starts to decompose about an hour and a half after death. The smell would not be his master's smell, so the fact he smelt his master in the ground, whether it would be 6 foot or 3 foot down, that alone, no. That would never have happened. Even if he followed the coffin and he smelt the coffin before it was put in the ground, as soon as that dirt and that goes over it, and of course the body inside, no. That smell would be long gone. Second issue I have with that is a Skye Terrier. Now, I know quite a few, obviously working here, we do have the annual Bobby commemorative. We've got a lot of Skye Terrier owners that come in. I speak to loads of them as soon as I see a Skye Terrier, because they're wonderful dogs, extremely dozy, but they're wonderful upside down mops. But they're lovely dogs, absolutely lovely dogs. You can see out their hair. So I've spoken to a few, and there is not one of them have confirmed with me that they have had a Skye Terrier more than 13 years. They don't have a long life, they're ratter dogs. Even well looked after. So how a dog lasted for 14 years living rough in a Scottish graveyard when you had humans that didn't hardly last 4 months in a Scottish graveyard with the Covenanters. So, people say, well, he had a shelter. He did have a shelter. He had the 2 gravestones down there that he would go under when it rained. He also would be in here. This office was built in 1834. To combat the grave robbing period. This is for the families to sit in and look out. At Bobby's time, this would have been James Brown's tool shed. James Brown was the sexton of the graveyard. He looked after the graveyard. He was the one that was here every day with the dog. So yeah, the dog would have been in here. The dog would have been at the open fire, so he did have places to go. I doubt James would have left him in overnight. You know, at first, James Brown didn't really want the dog in because he's a ratter. It's good for the rats. We still have rats in Greyfriars. However, when the dog starts digging, it's not the best, you know, thing to be doing in the graveyard. So, you know, it would have been, James would have been kind of balanced on it. Did he want a dog to feed and look after? He was merely a sexton of a graveyard, you know, so he wasn't in a high-paid position. Did he want to have the thing of a dog to look after and feed? Could he afford it? Probably not. However, people would come to the graveyard, Victorian time, and they would walk around the graveyard. James would be doing his thing, you know, cutting the grass or tidying things up. And he would show them around, he would speak to the people, he'd say, right, this is the Denniston Monument. You know, the Denniston were a very, very popular family. It was James Brown who done the great book, the epitaphs and memorials of Greyfriars Kirkyard. While he was working here, he documented every single stone and drew them and wrote them down in a book. You can get it today still, reprinted. Some of the stones are no longer here, so his documentation, absolutely unbelievable. But that's what he did. So he would go around, he would tell people about the things, and of course at the end of it they would say, thank you for your time, sir. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Here's something for yourself. Look after yourself, sir. So of course this was great. He would have a little side earner, you know, kind of tour guide if you wish. But this little dog, James is walking about and this little dog was hungry because James was like, I can't feed you, I'm on a pittance myself. However, this poor little dog, people are walking around, he's like, oh, what can I do? You know, his poor master's died, he's buried, you know, and this dog's just hanging around, and the poor dog's obviously heartbroken, and what can I do as an honest citizen is I have to look after this poor animal, this poor wretched animal. He's taken a shine to me, what can I do? I can't leave him, he's heartbroken. So of course at the end they'd say, thank you for your time, sir, and get yourself something very special for your little friend. So there you go. So, We don't know if it was James Brown that brought John Gray, Greyfriars. We don't know if it was James Brown who brought the master in, and that's how Eleanor Atkinson has heard the story, or if it was actually Eleanor herself. 1911, nobody really gave two shits about a stray dog. Who wants to read a story about a stray dog? Yeah, it's not nice, but would you actually want to buy a book about a stray dog? Not really. There's loads of them in the streets. Even in the 50s, 60s, growing up, there's stray dogs all there. That's what you need to get a license. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Out of sight, out of mind. And certainly not the upper classes. Now, they don't really care about stray dogs. I've got my little penny dog. However, if you bring this poor master into this poor died master and this poor little dog, heartbroken, that little animal, you have to find out if it's alright or not. So, we will never know. We'll never know if it was Eleanor or James that brought John into it. But, having said that, the dog was more than real. We know the dog was real. Like I said, there's newspaper articles, the dog had his own state funeral, the dog was given the keys to the city. You don't just make that up and just throw it in as a conspiracy theory. There's loads of newspaper articles about it. There's people's diaries, we've got writings about it, and the archives, we've got one photograph, two, but the first one's blurred where the dog's running off the knee. It's the Trail family who used to live up there. The kids used to come down and play with the dog, and they managed to get it in the house because they used to feed it up at the cafe. And the first photograph, I think this is about 1860, so it was a very early photograph. It shows the blur because the dog's just obviously jumped off just at that moment. But the second one, the dog's actually sitting on the knee, and you can see the dog. So that's the only photograph in existence of the dog. But there's plenty of life drawings, there's plenty of life paintings, different artists. So again, they're not all just making it up. The dog was real. The dog was very real. And he was, the dog was loved by the people of Edinburgh. People would come from all over. He was a celebrity, because of the story and because he was getting well known. Well, at the time, we're not talking about 1911 when Eleanor wrote the book. Obviously, this is still when the dog was alive. So, he did have, and he was well looked after. The fact as well that the Baroness Coutts, a year after he died, actually paid for the monument to be put in. That's how much of an impact this little stray dog had. And he was well loved, but there is discrepancies with that, going back to the time of 14 years that the dog was here. There is discrepancies between the photograph and a couple of the life paintings and the description. For a start, the main discrepancy is why the statue that was done from life, literally later stages of the dog's life, it was done from life. Why is that not a Skye Terrier? It's nothing like a Skye Terrier. Yet the early drawings and the early paintings clearly show him as a Skye Terrier, with the ears down the here. That's more a Cairn Terrier, more a Downy Diamond Terrier. It's not a Skye Terrier. So why is that then? That then brings in the theory that there was more than one dog. I think an author, Jan Bodison, I think he touched on that subject in his book that he researched. I personally, after looking through the archives, that is one of the main conclusions that would certainly explain a good few discrepancies. One, the time. Two, the differences between the life paintings of the dog later in life and the early ones and the early descriptions. Again, we didn't have all this information in front of us. If they've got a dog that roughly looked the same sort of colouring, people weren't coming down to see them daily. They were coming, maybe monthly or maybe once, So it wasn't like you didn't have Facebook, like the posts were going up and there was a whole bloody page dedicated to it. So people couldn't, maybe there'd been a few people that were times like, that looks a bit strange. Oh, he's not feeling well. He's lost a bit of weight. If James was getting the money from people coming to see this dog, and of course he wanted to. A lot of people say, "Oh, the council were in on it." I don't think the council were in on it at all. I don't think the council even really cared about it. James certainly did, though, and anything to top his wages of, I could certainly understand. It was bringing people to the graveyard, and the more people came, the more he got to show around, the more money, tips, and things he got, and gifts, and yeah, and it was making James important as well. Just this the sexton who just cuts the grass in a graveyard became, everybody came to see him and the dog. So he was loving it. He was loving the attention as well, which I totally understand. It's just no different than putting a photo up online for likes. It's exactly the same. So, yeah, I do believe in the research that I have done personally. I do believe that the dog, of course, was very real. Even both of them. Possibly three of them. The dog was very real. So the story is true. The dog was here, and he was in the graveyard, and he was here for a long time. The master, though, the biggest knockback for that is there is no interment record for a John Gray in Greyfriars the year he died. That's again the reason why his name can't go on that board outside. You got on the board outside, you've got some of the most noble and the most recognised people to be buried in Greyfriars: Sir George Mackenzie, William Smellie. You've got the Botanics Encyclopedia. You've got obviously Lord Provost, famous Lord Provost. You've also got even William McGonagall. His name's on there.
Yeah, the worst poet who ever existed, isn't he?
But John Gray's had a Disney movie made about him. He's had countless books written about him. He's one of the most famous dog owners in the world. But his name can't go on that board because we've got no burial record for him in here. So, that alone says John never existed. There's no paper trail. We've even searched police records for employment, just in case, employment, because you can get police employment records. It's all archived. You can go through them for the years that he supposedly worked as a policeman. No, there's no John Gray. There is John Grays that worked for the police, and there is John Grays buried here. We've got 17 John Grays here in Greyfriars. However, not 6 years either side of when he allegedly died. 6 years is a big gap. All the interments were done in order. So there's not a case, we forgot one. It was all done in order. So there's no. Maybe he was real. But he's certainly not buried in Greyfriars if he was real. That's, I'm not going to say he didn't exist, because that's just me surmising from what research I've done. But maybe there's something I've not looked at. I haven't looked at the Collington burial records. Maybe there's a John Gray buried, there the year he died, in which case that would then throw open to maybe he was buried in Collington there. Because there has been chat about John Gray was indeed in Collington, near the agricultural fields and stuff. But again, why was the dog here then? So, yeah. The dog was very real, but unfortunately, so far, we can't prove that the master was real. But it's still a good story of devotion. The dog was devoted to the people of Edinburgh. In Edinburgh, especially James Brown, he was devoted to the dog, because he was, and he did care about the dog,
So basically, the character you see in the Disney movie, he was always trying to get rid of the dog.
Exactly.
Not entirely true.
I can believe that at the start, because like I said, the dog would like to dig. And, having a dog dig in a graveyard is not the best. Not the best, especially not one like this. But yeah, he did. I mean, he was just a man, and although he couldn't really afford to keep it because, like I said, his pay would have been pittance for his job. It wasn't a high skilled job at all. It was, it was low, but he was happy, and he'd done a great job in the graveyard. And of course, his book alone, is a wealth of knowledge from his time, and that alone is worth every single penny that he was given. He should have been given a lot more, because for us nowadays to look through his book and get the ones that are no longer here, it's amazing. And he done the Latin, and he actually done the English translation on the stones as well. I mean, his book is tremendous. Really, really good. So yeah, he just had a little companion, I think, and he was making a side earner with his little companion.
Why not?
Absolutely, his little sidekick. So yeah, when the Disney guys came in, the movie was released in 1961. The Disney guys, and you got to remember that memorial stone out there for the dog wasn't there. That was only put there in 1981. So when the researchers came in for the Disney movie, of course they came in. Obviously there was no John Greystone down there, because again that was put in after. So they were looking around the graveyard for John Grays, and of course they found one. They found one just outside the Mackenzie mausoleum, literally just two down. That's the one that they thought, oh, John Gray, there we go, that's it. So of course the sets were then designed, all that stuff, because none of it was filmed here. It was all designed, and of course that's why in every backdrop you see the Mackenzie mausoleum. And of course this is back to front. This is people have come in and said, oh, was this moved? No, it's never been. It's been here since it was built. But in the movie, it's on the other side because it wasn't filmed here. It was filmed in Pinewood. None of it was filmed here. It was all a movie set. So that, yeah, they did get the wrong John Gray. It's the wrong date for a start. You know, they don't let that get in the way of a Disney movie. So that's why, yeah, the backdrop, the graveyard's all back to front and everything like that. It's, but that's, yeah, so Disney came in and then it took off again. And of course, after that, that's when the memorial stone was put to Bobby there. That was put there in 1981, paid for by the Dog Society, the American Dog Society. Because I said there was nothing. There was nothing there before. That area there, where the stone is, the reason it was decided to be put there, not just because it's the first one when you walk in, from the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, kids growing up, you know, household pets were becoming more of a thing, you know, dogs and things like that. So, but however, in the local area, most of the tenement buildings, you have gardens in the centre of Edinburgh. You know, you just don't have gardens. So when their pet passed away, you can't bury them in the garden. So, you know, so what kids used to do is the kids, once the pet had died, they would come here, in this little garden area here, they would put their pet toys here. That is one of the, well, that was the main reason why they decided to put the Bobby Stone there, right in the front, because kids had already been putting their dog toys and things like that, so they thought the whole garden area would be a great tribute for the dog, and of course to continue with the kids of Edinburgh, you know, bringing their deceased pets' toys and things and put them down. So yeah, that's why the stone was decided to be put there. And never, the sticks is a relatively new thing. Sticks only started happening in the last sort of 8 years. Slightly less time than it has been for the rubbing of the nose. Yeah, that was 2013. That started by an idiot tour guide who told his group, rub the nose for good luck.
Oops.
So far I believe that nobody's ever rubbed it and won the lottery. I could be wrong. However, that is a lot of people come in, and I don't believe that people do it out of malice. They don't come and do it, you know, to cause damage. However, what you don't realise is we have 1.3 million people coming through the gates of Greyfriars every year. Even 80% of that 1.3 million people, hundreds of thousands of people, is coming past that statue and rubbing its nose. It's not one or two. You know, you do that over the space of years since 2013. Unfortunately, what people don't realise is that that statue is not solid. It's not a solid mass of brass. It's bronze, it's hollow inside, it's cast, which means eventually there's going to be a crack made in its nose, and that crack is going to explode. And once that does happen, that statue is destroyed. It's a Grade A listed national monument. It is the smallest monument in the country, and it's the same grade as the castle and the Wallace Monument and the Bannockburn Monument as well. If you were to deface any of these other Grade A listed national monuments, you'd be looking at a maximum of £5,000 fine for a first time offence or 5 years imprisonment. Why is that statue any different to the castle? It's not, it's the same grading. It's exactly the same grade. People are like, oh, it's just a statue. No, it's a Grade A listed national monument. It is a monument, a national monument, and it needs to be protected. People, like I say, don't do it in malice, but every single rub is destroying that statue slowly, and it needs to stop. We've tried loads of things. We've put signs up, they just get ripped down. We've put masks on it, they get ripped off. We've tried standing there and educating people. Don't pay attention, because they've heard somewhere online that rubbing it brings you good luck. It doesn't. It does not. I'm just surprised nobody's caught an STD from it so far. When they done the tests on the McDonald's touchscreens, you know, when the first McDonald's touchscreens came in, they done a swab test of one in London. They took a swab, they put it off to the lab. 86% human fecal matter were found on that screen, because people don't wash their hands after the toilet. You come out, you come along, you rub that statue, oh, good luck. You then have a cigarette, or you go have a Subway, and then you wonder why you've got an upset tummy. Oh, it must have been the Subway. Oh, no, it's because you've just eaten somebody else's shit for rubbing a statue in public, you idiot. Like I said, people don't do it in malice, but it needs to stop. It's destroying a Grade A listed monument. All seriousness, it needs to stop. It's not going to bring you luck. You know, it's not, like I said, it's not just a statue. It is a Grade A listed monument, and it's part of Edinburgh's history, and nobody has the right to destroy that. It needs to be there for hundreds and hundreds of years yet to come. You know, So I'm very fierce about that. Very fierce about that, indeed. But again, a historian, it has to be preserved. You know, it has to be preserved. So yeah, that's another thing that sets me off. With robbing the booby.
I'm going to keep that bit in.
Nah, the jokes are stop rubbing the booby raw. Yeah, can't do nothing with a rubbed raw booby. Brilliant. So that's pretty much it. That's my daily life. That's pretty much what I talk about every day. Just like that.
Thank you for your time,
No
Jamie.
problem at all.